All right, well, welcome to this case webinar. We've got Phil Gillette and Bill Millard here joining us, and very glad to have them. Glad that everyone could be here. I want to take a moment and open us in prayer, and then we'll do some introductions and begin. So pray with me. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for the opportunity that we have to utilize this technology to meet live, but also to record and to have others join in this conversation. I pray that more than anything else, you would be honored and glorified in our conversation, and that we'll be blessed through this time together. In your name we pray. Amen. Well, I have the honor of having a couple of guys join us this morning. And so I'll introduce the first person, Dr. Phil Gillette, and then he'll introduce Dr. Bill Millard. And so Phil is with the Ron Bluth Institute, and he is the director of the high school program. Personally, a good friend of mine. I think I've known Phil for quite a while now, right, Phil? 5-6 years or so. He's a good friend of mine, a good friend of CASE, a good friend of CCEI that I represent as well. And so, Phil, glad to have you here. Why don't you introduce Bill, and then you can go ahead and introduce the general format of how we're going to do things. And for those that are just joining us, I'm going to go ahead and mute your microphone from my spot. If you have questions, please utilize the chat area, and I'll monitor the chat to ask questions, and then certainly give you opportunities to ask as well, and we'll turn your microphone on as needed. So, Phil, it's all you. Go ahead and take it from here.
Great. Thank you, Mitch. It's good for us to be involved here with you all today, and excited about the opportunity to share more about life calling and helping students begin to understand their calling and purpose in life. Our main presenter today is Dr. Bill Millard, a good friend of mine. We've worked together here for the past 9 years, and Bill is well, what are you now? I'm trying to think. Bill is the president and CEO of Life Discovery, senior scientist there, and is the creator of the Life Calling curriculum, the Life Calling model that we utilize in our Life Calling course. And is really an individual who has impacted many, many people in the terms of life calling, schools and institutions around the country. So we're really glad to have Bill here and present with us today. Feel free to ask questions as we go through, and then I'll come back at the end and talk a little bit more about how the implementation of this works or might work at your school. So Bill, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Phil. It's a pleasure for me to be here sharing as well. That when it comes to this whole subject, this is something that burns passionately in my heart. And so I'm always glad to join with people who are looking at it and talking about it. And a lot of it comes from where my start is. Certainly the last 20 years I was working in higher education. So it'd be easy to think that's where all of my thoughts and theories and exploration of life calling come from. But it actually came more from two other places. Number one, it came from, if you had a chance to read my blog, it came from the fact that, man, I think I tried almost everything on my way to finding out where I was in life. So, I mean, I've studied everything from history to law to dentistry to public health to chemistry to education, all over the place as I was going through, because there wasn't any real guidance at that time in my life. And I find that I enjoyed just about everything I studied. But one thing I see with students today as I'm working with them is that it's not that they don't have anything to do, it's that they have too many choices to look at. And that's part of the thing that causes some confusion. Secondly, though, is the real passion for doing this with me and exploring it as far as helping students came in teaching high school myself. And all of my work, my original work, was done with high school students. It was not done with college students. That came later on in the program as I went along. So it's been with me all my life, all my adult life. I've looked at this, and it's been a passion on it because I've seen this. It's interesting as we go from one generation to another and we come up with all these different names for them. There is this commonality that's been along there, and it really comes from a state of confusion. It really is. As I deal with individuals, deal with students, and work with them, I've seen that in adults. It's interesting. I have a chance to speak to parents of students all the time. Whenever I'm talking about this and talking about what we do with students, they always say, well, do you still do those for people who are 50 and 60 years old? Because we've all gone along in life in a sense of confusion as we go along there. But let me let me deal with a couple or three things, and then I want to tell you what we do in response to that. Let me give you some examples of some things that I've seen in students, especially in millennials. And really, to be honest with you, if you're in K through 12 right now, as far as education goes, you ought to bless the millennial research, put your hand on it and say, thank you, and we're happy that we did that at one time, and send it on its way. Because you're not dealing with millennials anymore, you're dealing with post-millennials. And there's all sorts of names that are coming up with it, whether it's Generation Z or iGen or whatever. I like, one of my favorites, and I tend to use this as I'm doing my research and talking, I like the term that is used for it as Homelanders, or the Homeland generation coming out at 9/11, because these are individuals that have been born from 1997 through probably 2007 or 2010. There's no unanimity right now where the end age is for the generation we're talking about, but they're the ones that are in your schools right now, and the ones just starting to come into college. And they have some, there's no doubt about there's some commonality between the Homelander generation and the millennials, but there's some differences too. And both generations really come out a little bit with a confusion and misdirection that I was talking about, but they also both, and I would say that the Homelander generation is coming just as strong as the millennials with the, what I would call unrealistic expectations as far as their lives go, which is the example. I'm up here right now. I'm not in my home in North Carolina. I actually live on the beach in North Carolina on Barrier Island, having just gone through Hurricane Matthew. But I'm actually speaking back at Indiana Wesleyan University. So I'm in Indiana today talking about this thing. I was just talking with a top-level administrator here at this university, and they're in a search right now for a senior vice president for development of this university. Pretty high-level job. And he is having a conversation with a recent graduate here who is 23 years old, who he's done some successful work in working as in investments and finances, but he was exploring whether he should put his name in for the job of senior vice president of development for the university, and doing it with a straight face. I mean, this is not a joke. I mean, he really believed that he was ready for that job. And I was talking to, because I think here's what ends up happening. I see this happening in churches. They try to look at this and they say, well, there's a lack of humility there on the part of this person. And they try to address it as if it was arrogance versus humility. And I said, you guys are missing the boat. This is not a case of arrogance. This student, or this recent graduate, is not arrogant coming in looking to apply for a vice president job at a university. It's a blind spot. It's not arrogance. He really believes he's capable of doing that job. He may actually have skill sets that could, but the one thing that has been lacking there in how we find, and to a great extent, this is our fault for bringing our individuals to this point. We haven't done a good job of helping them see that you need to travel a path. Like I was talking to students last night. I told them this. I said, a couple things. The path to the most effective path to success goes through the valley of failure. That if you haven't gone through these life experiences where you've seen what it means to fail and then to respond or to rebound with resilience and come back, then you don't really have the experiential skill set where you're at. And we've helped raise a couple of generations with millennial and the Homeland generation by telling them they can do anything they want and they've got everything they want. Then they graduate from college and they believe that's what they're ready for. So I don't think it's arrogance on their part. I think it's a blind spot where they just don't realize that this part of their life is lacking. So I think we need to look at that. So to me, to have to undo this problem, to just have somebody preach and hammer home the thought of, well, you need to be more humble in your life instead of being arrogant, isn't going to solve the problem. Instead, we need to help them see this path. There's a great book just come out. I don't know if any, if you haven't read this book, jot it down and read it. It's written by Angela Duckworth, a real sharp social psychologist. And the name of the book is Grit. So you don't have to work hard to figure that title. Grit. get a hold of it and read it, because she really points out that in her research and her work that to succeed in life isn't just a matter of finding your strengths. It's about being strong and then having the endurance to carry it out, what she starts to call grit. And I'm really starting to see that as a real lack in students when we come out, their willingness to just stick to something. You want to know what you're passionate about, you stick to it. So I think what we do, when we go back to career guidance and life guidance, we still tend to map out these paths of interest and emphasize their uniqueness. And we're not having them see, okay, you now need to be willing to take this and travel a rough road where you're going to learn some things. You're going to learn as much from failure as you are from success. In fact, my feeling right now, I'm working with individuals, I don't know I would ever hire a person who couldn't identify a time that they failed at something they wanted to succeed at, and then could describe on how they rebounded from that, what they learned from that. It's not that failure is the end goal. It's this, that it's just a place where we learn, and we can learn then to respond with resilience. And that's what I'm seeing is really missing in a lot of the students coming out. It's interesting. Some of the things that they're using as far as characteristics, researchers like Tim Elmore and others have seen coming in with the generations that are coming through right now is they are far more private than the generation before, the millennials were. They're not as quite as open on Facebook and other places. One thing you'll see about them is that you always hear this said, that they're multitaskers. Let me tell you this though, as a researcher myself, I believe multitask title is a myth. I actually don't believe in it. I have some strong psychologists that would bear me out. The human brain actually is not designed to multitask, so nobody can multitask. So when you hear people say, I'm really good at multitasking, they're just delusional. What it is that they've learned to do multiple tasks at the same, in a quick succession. They come in and out. They behave and think more digitally than analog. Excuse me. Analog, you have waves. Digital, it's just on and off. That's what's really going on in multitasking. It's not that they're efficiently doing multiple tasks at the same time. They jump in and out of tasks, and what ends up happening, most people who say that they're great multitaskers are not really that great at any of the tasks because they haven't learned to give the focus they need. And so we hear that, and part of that is because one of the things that's really interesting, because brain psychology is starting to see this, the generation coming right now is thinking differently than any generation has before. They think iconically, is what I call it. And it comes partly because of the addiction to technology. But they think iconically. What do I mean by that? They think of it like this. Think about when you turn on your smartphone and you see all those icons, that's how they think. And it's actually changed the architecture of their brains as compared to generations before, where there was much more of a cause to effect linear thinking. And I think we have to understand that when we're looking at it. I'm going to show you a couple of things here in just a minute in what we do in helping students look through this. And I'm actually starting to think, I challenge myself, because I realize I am a scientist that thinks linearly, cause to effect. For me to think iconically, like the students coming along who are 15, 16 years old, is really hard for me to understand. But they think, and knowing that they think differently, we have to approach that differently. So coming back with the same old solutions for helping them to try to find guidance and purpose in their life just isn't going to work. One of the things that we have done, I've tried over the last 15 years to develop a comprehensive model that helps me at least look at the issues that need to be addressed. And I want to put that up on the screen here and share it. I'm not going to go through all the elements of it, but I'm going to just put it up so you can see it. And I'll keep talking. Okay, let's see. Hopefully everything is going to go good here. Let's get off of the fact that I'm showing the screen. Now, hopefully that's on the screen. Is that on the screen? Okay, Phil is telling me that it's on the screen. Here's what we use in looking curricularly at addressing the issues that I talked about in the book, where I talked about the fact that there's this avoidance of pain, there's this confusion of self-centeredness. Here's what we think really helps in looking overall to find a idea of what I call life calling, and which has become incidentally a very popular term through popular culture as well as in more religious cultures. The idea of purpose and calling, to feel that sense of calling. We look at three broad elements of foundational values: unique design and personal mission. You can see all the parts that go into these, how I've labeled them and titled them. This all works together. But one of the things that I've seen is that there, in the confusion that comes out, is that there is a lack of an understanding of the values in your life. And so much of life guidance avoids this, and goes straight to what are you good at, what are you interested in, and how do we carry that through. We have found that if we can go down and look at foundational values, and you notice I have faith, character, and service as the elements, and notice how with faith I call that existential premises. People say, well, does this work? Because isn't this too religious for some schools that don't have a strong faith base, or students who are looking at it that way? Actually, the University of Alabama is using this model right now, and you understanding that it's existential premises that go in there. When we talk about faith, it doesn't necessarily have to be an overly religious term. It's what do you believe about yourself? But if we go back to those premises and then how we integrate them into the character of our life and how we serve others, that sets up a context that's going to give the meaning that are causing some of the other problems. This model forms the basis for the curriculum that I've written. It also it's the curriculum that is used by Phil in the high school program. But let me do one thing here with that, and it'll help you see in comparison to my blog what I see. I've taken all the terms down, just left the three main parts in there. Notice I've drawn a line going diagonally through the middle of this model. And what I would say is I'm starting to see, and I got to tell you right now, this is early research that I'm working on. The meaning in life is dealt with foundational values and part of the uniqueness of our design. The grit that we're talking about, what it's going to take to carry out something in our life, comes below that line in part of our unique design and our personal mission. And notice the four problems that I identified in my blog, I put on there. I think that the self-centeredness, and I said the selfishness of indifference, I've termed it here the self-centeredness because here's the problem I have with myself and others when we use the word selfish. We hear that, and I think we too quickly jump to applying a religious connotation to that word selfish. We see it as good and evil. And the reason I like self-centeredness again is because I'm finding with the tail end of the millennial generation, well, probably the whole millennial generation and the homelanders coming along, is that what we're really dealing with is a self-centeredness, and it's not an evil selfishness. It's like the arrogance. It's not because it's just we have spent so much time talking to them about their importance that they can't help but become self-centered. They've also become addicts of technology, which is all designed to center in on them, and that's where they get this self-centeredness. So I think self-centered is actually a better term than selfishness. And what it does is it causes this indifference then to others because they're so focused on themselves. How can I get ahead? What's in it for me? How can I make sure that I get what I deserve and am entitled to? I really believe that that's best addressed in the foundational values. That's why I put it above that line. But the other three things that I talked about, the comfort of complacency, the fear of failure, and the avoidance of pain, I think that's all addressed by what Duckworth calls grit, and what I'm starting to develop in looking at grit and expanding on what she has done. And we see that then in the whole section of our model of where we carry it out through the response to the needs of the world, vision, and action. What do we do? But it also is found in things like our passion. That's grit too. I like to talk to students when they're looking at what are you passionate about? Think about this. If you were looking at what you really wanted to do, you had a vision of something that you really wanted to do, and you put that on the other side of a swimming pool, and then you said you could reach your vision by swimming across to that other side where your vision is, that would go pretty easy. But here's real passion. What if the swimming pool is filled with mud? Would you be willing to swim across in mud to get there? Are you going to willing to go that struggle that goes across there, where there is going to be pain, there is going to be trials to get there? That's what you're really passionate about. You'll endure anything to get there. You'll set other things aside. That's all part of grit. And so that's why I think that I drew the line here. It's awfully hard when you have three balls or three circles to divide it into two hemisectors or whatever. But I tried to do that to illustrate that the issues of grit are predominantly addressed in a unique design and personal mission. And the meaning is addressed above the line with foundational values. Let me show you one other thing here, and then I'm going to wrap mine up and let you ask me some questions. Here's my challenge there right now. See, I think intuitively. I think in a model like I have on the left, going back to what we showed at the beginning. So I love to think like that. But what research is showing me now and challenging me is that students don't think that way anymore. They think iconically. So probably I'm going to have to develop a model that looks more like what I have there on the right-hand side of my screen. There's like a cell phone with all the icons up, and they're going to go in and out and think in all these things and explore them whenever they feel necessary, instead of always working so linearly like I like to think. I just throw that out to you, this picture here, just to show you that I'm even challenging myself as to how I think as we look at this. But I think we need something comprehensive like this to help our students move beyond the complacency that they have and the self-centeredness that they have, and help them to think beyond themselves. I find that they respond well when we have these kinds of discussions. It just hasn't been there for them to be challenged in the past. And so that's why we've taken this and put it together into an entire curriculum for schools to use in helping them think through these things. Right now, we're also, though, taking this whole research into this area and seeing how it develops, starting at 2 years old and goes clear through till basically cradle to the grave, because this never ends. This exploration never ends. And you never come to the point where you say, okay, I've got it all figured out. What we try to do with this model is not so much help them figure everything out, is help them identify areas in their lives that they should be looking at and targeting as they explore purpose and meaning in their lives. It's comprehensive, there's no doubt about it. So the challenge for any teacher who's working with this, or a guidance counselor working with this, is to take it and make and simplify it in such a way that the students can work with it. We've tried to do that with the book, and I think we've been reasonably successful. One of the reasons I just finished filming we did a 20 episode mini-series on all parts of this model, just filmed it all, called Life Going on the Beach, where we use examples from the ocean and the beach at Oak Island, where I live in North Carolina, trying to give a visual and a graphic way of looking at these things and learning as well, because we realize that you've got to learn in multiple ways. But the important thing I'm hoping you can gather from this today is there is an approach. If we look at all these things, we can challenge those 4 things that I talked about and looking for the power of purpose. We can get past them if we can set things ahead that challenge us to move forward and to move beyond. If we don't, it's going to be too easy to linger in those areas. Well, let me take that off the screen and come back on as a human being back on the screen rather than an icon. And just say this. I think anybody who's looking to help individuals find the power of purpose in their lives is going down a worthy process, because that's what it takes in a challenging world like we're in right now, where there's so many choices and where there's so many obstacles. We need that strong power of purpose to keep us going. It'll not only give us, as I said in my 2 lines, it'll give us meaning, but I think it can help us then develop the grit that we need to keep going when things get tough. I'm going to move now to addressing, I noticed there's a couple of comments in the chat. Now, Mitch, you're in charge there. How do we get those chat questions up here?
Yeah, they're not, no one's asked any questions yet. So anyone who has questions, feel free to type them into the chat. Bill, do you want to pause here for a second and take a few questions?
Yeah, I would definitely like to do that.
Okay, well, so
period of dialogue right now.
yeah, so folks, if you have questions, please feel free to ask. Type them in the chat. If you want to ask the question on your own, just let me know. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. Just don't want to keep everybody on mute while we go, because it makes the sound a lot better. I'll lead with one question, and I got several here. But one of the things you said, talking about students in particular, but for those of us that are perhaps leading a school, how do you see this affecting the folks that we manage? Because we certainly are managing, I call them students now, and they're not students anymore, they're our employees, but they're in their younger 20s, mid 20s. And one of the things you talked about was this thinking differently, iconically versus linearly. Do you have any advice for managing folks who are now coming into institutions who think this way?
Well, I think the one thing that's really important is not to try to manage them in the way that you're comfortable be managed. I mean, we tend to do that all the way. We always treat people like we would like to be treated, but we need to take time to learn. I think as a leader and a manager, the best thing you can do is to take time to get to know the people working for you, your team, and how do they learn? How do they operate? And then come up with ways to interact with them that are meaningful to them. Now, there's no doubt about there's some things you're going to have to, everybody's got to realize that life can't always be done just in exactly the way that's the most comfortable for you. But on the other hand, I think too often we as teachers or as leaders have often thought, well, it's just everybody's responsibility to learn how to respond in the way I teach or lead, as opposed to saying it's my responsibility as a leader or teacher to find out how people learn and operate and then try to provide opportunities. So that's what I would do. One of the schools, some of the schools that have been the most successful in implementing our whole approach to life calling have been ones that have adopted it as a paradigm for the entire school. And they actually take all of their employees through some level of thinking through this process to start to change the way they do. And people start to understand where they're coming from, and then they share that, how they learn, where they're at. And that's very valuable for the administrators as well as it is for the working team.
Thanks, Bill. Angela Brugman has a question, and it's a very good one. She wants to know, has anyone discovered a good tool to help parents embrace the idea of allowing students to struggle? And I think if I can add on to that, I think she feels what many of us feel, which is we can talk about how good struggle is, but how do we help our parents see that that's actually a good thing? Yeah,
and really, to be honest with you, the students' avoidance of struggle and pain is as much the fault of parents as it is their own. I mean, we've done that as parents. We've done that as people trying to make sure everything went easy with them. And really, I think one of the things that you can do is to help parents quit trying to provide for their students the exact opposite of life of what they went through. They've gone through struggle and they went through pain, and they're saying, I don't want my child to have to go through the same thing. Well, guess what? What you went through shaped you into who you are. And the struggles are where, think about this. I use the analogy, I use this with parents all the time, that if you're on a sports team there, if you have a football program at a school, what do they make them do to practice and get ready to play football? They go out and try to push big objects around that weigh also. They fill tires with cement and everything else to push around, because they realize that strength in life is based on pushing against an obstacle. And when you see failure as you see it rather than being something evil or wrong, it's just, in a sense, to see it more as an obstacle. And rather than trying to remove it, just figure out how to push it and to develop the strengths to deal with it. When we do that, you'll find strength everywhere else. You've got to help explain that to a parent. And get them past the idea that all their job is to keep their child from having any kind of unpleasant experience in their lives. To realize that unpleasantness develops this experience as part of our our unique design that's just as important as anything else we're looking at.
Have you seen, as a follow-up question to that, have you seen specific examples? Obviously, you can share that example of the practice, which is a very good example. Have you had any particularly poignant examples of either, rather than just even talk, ways that you can help them? Because I think that one of the struggles most of us in schools are going to say is we'll say those things, and then the person they'll look back at us like we're crazy. And there is kind of the point of the salient point of making a difference in a parent's life to make a difference in a student's life. Outside of that example, can you think of or have any other words of encouragement that could hone us in that really, because changing the heart of the parent is primarily changing the heart of the student. So any follow-up?
Mitch, this is Phil.
Yep.
And one of the things that we do in our curriculum is we have a tool that engages parents and students together so that students go home and have some direct communication and conversation about their lives and allow parents to speak into that. And so it's a really neat way, kind of a 360 evaluation that we provide that encourages students and parents to have dialogue and engage in conversation about some of the real significant aspects of their lives. And so I think just doing that allows, gives parents the tool that they can begin to communicate with their students about some of these very real issues that they have in their own lives.
Mitch, let me just jump in here real quick. Did everybody hear what Phil just said?
I think
It didn't come through. I hear him because he's in the room with me, but it didn't come through on my earphones. And so I just wanted to make sure that it came through to everybody.
Yeah, I think we did hear him. I heard him, so I'm assuming everyone else heard him as well.
Nod your head if you heard Phil okay. Okay, good. All right.
And then there's another question here from Doug. He wants to know, how do we align assessment practices to ensure that our classrooms can be a safe place to fail? That's a brilliant question. So he's talking about in the classroom, we certainly have ways of assessing our students. Is there any way to model failing forward, even through our assessments and the way we align them?
One of the keys is a couple of things. Number one is to see assessments as assessments. A lot of times people look at assessments and see them as tests, and tests have definitely a very permanent connotation. But if we would see it more as assessing, where are you at this time as snapshots in time, and then realize that what we gather from that information is not punitive, but instead it's directional. It helps us know where to, that we use it to say, where do we need to go? Where do we need to focus on improving, or to help with? When we can see it as a tool to help us gain better direction, then as a tool to sort of categorize, in a sense, punitive or punish almost in a sense, I think that's what we need to do as far as assessments go. Most assessments, I don't care what it is. I mean, I work in psychometrics all the time, and most of them do not have the capability of giving us the information that we claim they do to make the permanent decisions that we do with them. They are all, to a great extent, snapshots in time and need to be seen as that.
Would that, Bill, would it be fair to say that you would then be an advocate to adjust assessment where students have an opportunity to go back and reassess over time? I know very few schools that assessments aren't permanent, in the sense that once taken, marks are final and there's no ability to adjust them. Where would you fall? It's a little bit outside of the scope of where we are in this conversation, but I think it might lead to a culture or a perspective. I'm curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm totally against the one time, the one stop does everything, because there's no assessment on earth ever developed that can give you that kind of information that merits that kind of permanency.
Excellent.
I would definitely develop a culture that there's ongoing and repeated assessment.
Excellent. And that as a follow-up question, Josh had asked the question, as long as assessments are tied to grades, won't they be punitive? So what are your thoughts with assessments tied to grades and how this affects a culture of life calling? So we want to keep it on this central topic, but certainly it affects us in schools.
Well, I mean, certainly the whole idea of grades in that whole area. Uh, Here's a good example. Let me. I don't want to get too far off field here, but I had a student a couple of years ago that was dismissed from a nursing program at the university because they have a policy that a student has to have a grade point average of 2.75 or higher to remain in the nursing program. And this student had been dismissed from the program because her grades had been such that she dropped down to 2.7499. So she was 1/10,000th of a decimal point off from the required 2.75. And I understand you got to have your standards and everything, but anybody that believes that any teacher can objectively, without bias or whatever, determine what a student is to 1/10,000th of a decimal point is completely deluded. It's not possible. And so, while I'm not saying grades should be suggested, I do believe if you go back here's a book that was quite a ways back that's really good to look at, written by Alfie Kahn. It's called Punished by Rewards. Real controversial, and especially in K through 12 education. He really challenges the whole grading process, saying that it really doesn't work. But I think it's worth looking at the whole idea of punish with rewards, or you can think about punish with other things too. But this whole idea that we can tie these things is a mistaken belief. Now, I'm challenging the whole educational culture that way, which I've been a part of for decades. But I think we've got to look at a different way, because when it does come to life calling, the problem is when those students see those negative grades, they start to believe that's who they are. And if your school, I can tell you, if you ever get a chance to be where I'm speaking to a group and I tell my wife's story, I mean, my time through elementary, middle school, and high school was tumultuous. I mean, I was into all sorts of trouble, and my grades were atrocious, and my teachers all believed that I was the least likely to succeed. And yet, when I got into college, I had a couple people come around me and help me learn how to learn in the way that I learned. I went on to accomplish, to graduate at the top of my class and to go on and do the same thing in multiple graduate degrees, because I'd learned a different approach. Our schools still, unfortunately, tend to use too much one way does it for everybody. And grades reflect that. And when a person sees that, then they start to think that's who I am, rather than saying, oh, wait, I might be a little bit different. And if I've got a chance to learn a little different, maybe I can turn things around. I don't know if that directly answers the question, but kind of goes down that way.
No, but Bill, it certainly helps. And it shows that all of these things are tied together, right? Is that life calling and a culture of creating a culture where folks or students are pursuing their calling, it has tentacles that go deep into our organization, not just in a curriculum in one classroom taught by one teacher, but certainly culturally across the board. One of the things that you also mentioned, I think that's of particular interest, and I'd like you to spend a little bit more time on, is you talked a little bit about these unrealistic expectations and this contrast between arrogance and humility. And you spent a little bit of time talking about blind spots. And it's something that, as a leader, I've been doing a lot of research and thinking about, just even in terms of my leadership team. But can you talk to us a little bit more about these blind spots? What blind spots are you seeing, and how do we actually help students? How do we shed light into those blind spots, maybe shine a mirror so they can see them a bit?
Well, I think one of the greatest blind spots that's been allowed to develop, and of course, blind spots is where you just don't see it in yourself. And that is this whole area. We have not done a good job of helping them understand that there is a pathway of experience that a person needs to travel to hone and develop the skills. It's interesting. They can all see it in music and athletics. They know that nobody walks onto the football field or the soccer field and is excellent at what they're doing right off the bat, even if they've been born with the greatest giftedness. That it takes a lot of practice and working together to develop what it's going to take to succeed as a team. Somehow that gets lost with this generation as far as life goes, and I think part of it's the helicopter parents that have lowered down from helicopter status to lawnmower status in trying to make sure that they believe everything about themselves. And they just don't understand the value of saying, why don't I have 10 years of experience? of doing this and see where I'm at that time. They have this, and part of it, let's face it, our whole media is so focused on very short-term gratification that it really helps a person develop the attitude that everything should come to me right now. But I think the one blind spot we could do a lot with our students, I think I'm going to just start looking at this in my curriculum. I haven't written as much as I should on this, of what will it take to get people to see the value of putting in the time and the effort in life, not just in sports, but in life, of developing and honing the skills that can then truly allow me to be at the level I would like to be.
Does anyone else have other questions? Certainly have some more that I can ask Bill to keep our discussion moving along, but I have given an opportunity certainly to do that. Phil, if you want to chime in, I know at some point we had talked about you stepping in and also providing some comments here. Angela asked a question. Well, Phil, you maybe prepare for a comment. As a school, are there ways that we can celebrate struggle? So Bill, that's our question, even going to say that culturally, how do we do that?
I think that's a great question. And rather than just throw something off the top of my head, all I'm going to do is tuck that one away and take it with me and think about it, because I think that would be it's a real challenge. I think it's a great thing to do, to say, how do we celebrate struggling and showing that that's a valuable part of what we do. I like that question. I don't have to think about it. I wish I had an answer. I want to think about that.
Angela, I'll give you an answer, not in the sense that I have an answer, but something that I'm pondering as a head of school is even modeling that through my own personal development. So one of the things that I'm wrestling with now is how do you show your immediate folks you supervise or the folks that you lead that they need to develop and grow. And so I just done a series of presentations in a few places, and even taking that on personally. If I'm not transparent and I don't model my own growth in front of others, then I don't have any hope of helping them grow. And so I offer that only as a suggestion, as someone who is kind of groping for the answer like you are to that question. I've taken a personal response to it. And I'm curious if others have maybe some answers. Bill's going to tuck that away, but maybe this is a good time for others to unmute themselves and possibly give an answer to that question briefly.
And Mitch, I'll jump in a little bit too on that idea. I think one of the things that, we dealt with this last year when we did a webinar, in a series, and there, there's some good research. It's just stop celebrating all the little petty successes and all the little nonsensical things that we do at schools. And I mean, I think one of the things is we over celebrate, we over reward, we overdo it on such a large extreme that we lose sight of, the effort it takes to develop skill, to become craftsmen in our own profession, and in our own work. And so we over reward, we over celebrate, rather than saying, hey, you know what, there is just the normal life to live. And there are things to celebrate and there are successes, but how do we do it appropriately and find that right that right kind of boundary line of celebrating, the great things of our community, but then not over celebrating all the things that don't really matter.
Excellent. There's another question here that came up. Josh and Bill and Phil, they asked this question. Should schools have a course that teaches these skills, or should these skills be integrated into the curriculum, or perhaps both?
I think there's a value to having both. If you have courses that look at this kind of thing, but if you can be incorporated across your curriculum, that's going to have your greatest impact on students. Anytime a program is always separate, it's easy to see it as ancillary instead of direct. So if it can be incorporated into the curriculum, and then maybe have one on both, it's also good. Mitch, I need to tell everybody here, I'm going to have to check out of here in just a couple of minutes, because I'm actually speaking in a few minutes to pre-med students at this university who are trying to figure out whether they should stick with pre-med or if that's the right decision in their lives. So.
Well, I appreciate it, Bill. On behalf of us, thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. I know that I mentioned kind of offline before we started this and recording, you've had a tremendous impact on me. My whole dissertation and work was seriously centered on a conversation I had with you 6 or 7 years ago back at Indiana Wesleyan.
I remember that conversation well.
I thank you for your work, and thank you for all that you're doing to continue to further the gospel through your work. So thank you so much. And this is a great segue then, Phil. Do you want to pick up here? and Carrie, from this point forward, and Bill, on behalf of us, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mitch.
Yeah, sure, Mitch. I'm happy to do that. I think
Oh, Phil got muted.
Yep, somehow Phil got, let me, so I can fix that. Hold on one second. Go ahead, Phil. Try
Hello?
again.
Yes.
Oh, somehow Phil's sound was tied to Bill Millard. So when he came off, your sound is off, Phil. So I don't know how that was happening. Do you want to check very quickly? Eric, do you have any ideas? When he left, Phil is now off.
Yeah, I'm checking. But I mean, I think, as Phil works on that, one of the things that's, Phil's been kind of working on is the whole idea of, the connection between Life Calling, and all the work that they've done there, and now the Ron Blue Institute and some of the things coming up there with the financial literacy. But it'd be interesting, Mitch. I mean, to even ask people here, the question of Dr. Millard's work and some of the things that you're getting at is how much of all of this changes everything that we do.
Yeah, that's a great question. Do others have some ideas and perhaps some thoughts? Maybe he's challenged you a bit. Feel free to unmute yourself and give us some thoughts on how this might change everything that you do. I think Phil's going to step out and come back. So feel free. Don't be embarrassed. Chime on in and give us some thoughts.
Because I mean, you look at, in the old traditional idea of it is, I mean, grades, test scores, homework, assessments. I mean, I love Alfie Kohn, so I'm glad that he mentioned them. It's all pretty much useless and pointless, and we know that, and we understand that. But then how do we also get to the place where even in our leadership and teacher evaluations, we know, generally speaking, they don't improve teaching. They don't improve learning all that much. And so when we look at, who we are and how we lead and how we manage and how we create systems and structures to draw people into, greater flourishing in life and in the workplace and in our profession and in learning, what are the things that we just completely need to rethink and redo based on some of this stuff that Dr. Millard shares with us.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, please.
Everyone hear me? So one of the things I've been thinking about for a long time, actually, I've a varied background in education. And one of the things I did was homeschool for a while. While I was homeschooling, we didn't do grades per se, but I developed this kind of mindset for my own kids. And I even had a neighborhood kid who was with me homeschooling. And my mindset was not so much looking at grades, but we did assessment to measure beyond mastery. And when I think about education, even in my own classroom when I've been teaching, I think about this idea of we need to move students not just through, getting an A, earning 99% or whatever, but moving them to a level of ownership. And so my trick as a teacher is how do I catch students owning the information they've learned in my class? So for example, last year I taught literature, and when a student would come to me and say, oh, hey, Mrs. V, I was listening to this song and there were these lyrics, and here's what I think is the theme. Here's what I think the lyricist was saying through this song. Has nothing to do with what we're doing in class, but is applying the skills to some piece of writing they're engaging with in their life. That's ownership. And I think that's a much better measure of whether or not the skills we're teaching them in classes, the information they're learning, is actually applying to their life. I would love to see education go to a place where somehow we create tools where teachers are looking for not just mastery of material and content, but are they owning it? I define that as they self-initiate the use of the skill and they do it well. So that's my 2 cents.
Mitch, you're muted. Phil, are you there?
Yep, I don't know if he's there. I see him.
Yeah. Phil? Yeah, no, we've lost Phil.
We have. Well, why don't we, Eric, at this point, if he doesn't come back up here in the next couple of seconds, I think we should probably bring this to a close, unless some others have some comments or some questions. Very stimulating, and I think that this should at least move us towards a way of thinking about our schools and our classrooms and our students, and really, quite frankly, ourselves, right? Because we're not immune from this journey ourselves, and so we're still on a journey of calling, if we're honest, and we're still seeking the Lord for that calling in our lives. So, Phil, give you one more shot here to pop in. Can we hear you? No.
No.
I don't think so. All right, will you close this in prayer, and then we'll wrap it up, and then we'll give Phil another chance here, another time to add his stuff in. So why don't you go ahead and close us in prayer?
Yeah, Lord, we thank you for this day. We thank you for Bill and Phil and the work that they're doing. We thank you for the opportunity to listen and to converse and to think. And we ask that you give us the energy and the courage to think differently about what we do and how it fits into what you'd have for us and what you'd have for our teachers and our communities and ultimately for the students that we get to work with each day. Bless each person here and bless the work that we do in your name. Amen.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn the recording